For joining me today. Ian is from Karbon, so I will let Ian just give a little bit of background on himself and what Karbon does.
Thanks, Amy. So my name's Ian Vacin. I'm one of the co-founders of Karbon. We've been around for about 4.5 years. If you want to learn about it, just go to karbonhq.com. Before that, I used to be at Zero, where Amy and I used to work together. So I was there for about 4 years, leading coding the US operation. And then before that, I worked at Intuit for almost 10 years with you yet again. And before that, I was in tech for many, many years. So thanks for having me on. Appreciate it. Really excited to chat today.
Yeah, so Ian and I have been longtime friends, and also I think both just so passionate about the accounting profession and trying to help that change management. And we've both pivoted in our careers to help the accounting profession in different ways. And one of the things that caught my attention is some new research, and Ian is just like an amazing researcher. So he loves getting into the detail and finding out just those nuggets of information that can really help an accounting firm. And so he did some work to really figure out what does it take to really do change management and to create what they call practice excellence. And so, Ian, do you want to start off and just talk about some of your key findings in this and what was most surprising to you when you did this research?
Yeah, so when we started this out, it was really, we got asked a lot by firm owners, how do I compare with somebody else? And then where are the areas that I do better, or where are the areas of improvement? And so we set off to try to create a way to measure that, which we hadn't seen done before. And it was more of a bet of whether or not it could be done between me and my co-founders. And so a year and a half later, we now have this report that we took the first 250 firms that went through it because it was enough data to be able to draw some conclusions from. And so I will say that, again, with anything that you do with research, it's not about taking it to heart all the finite points, but look at it in overall perspective and understand how you fit. So you can take the actual assessment, it'll give you a scorecard, and then it would fit within the data. So what was really interesting about this was we were trying to measure the competencies from a business perspective. We weren't measuring the technical side of an accounting firm because that's why you get your designations and everything else, but we want to understand from a business ownership perspective, what could you do? And so we had measured this across 12 competencies. We had created these 4 dimensions around strategy, efficiency, management, and growth. And then we came out with essentially, we found 9 really interesting pieces. And I'm not going to go through all of those because we don't have time for that. But I'll get through some of the really interesting bits. The first one was around systems thinking. So when you start to dig into the data and you start to look at each firm, and remember, these are snapshots. They're not necessarily looking at them over the life cycle. What we see is that firms will go out of balance. So you may decide that, right now for this given 6-month period or quarter, I'm going to work on my processes. I'm going to work on my efficiency in the company. And it will then move up and above the rest of your competencies. But every firm and every business owner tries to balance that back in. And it can take time. It can take a couple years. It can take a year. But you always want to be thinking about the business in its whole, holistic state, and knowing, again, that you might apply pressure on one, but then you'll need to apply pressure on the other ones. Now, with that, some of them were out of balance across the board. Interestingly enough, turns out most accounting firms aren't marketers. So it was always the sales and marketing chops or the tools that were being used weren't displayed from those firms. The most interesting insights, the things that got me really concerned, but also to be able to bring this report out to help others understand, is 2 things. One was we mapped out the capabilities. So when we took an understanding of the competencies, it's the inputs you put in your firm. And typically you would see this on a bell curve. And we didn't see a bell curve. We saw a double curve, which signifies that what's happening is some people get it and are actually spending the time and investing their effort to move their firm forward to be more progressive. And some people don't. And they might be too busy. And it's creating a situation of what I would call the haves and the have-nots. And you can clearly see it in the data, which for me, I've rarely seen that sort of pattern really emerge in a data set like that.
Well, go ahead. I think what's interesting about that, when you think about the actual, working with accounting firms and what goes on in a firm, it actually makes sense because typically what happens is there's a couple people in the firm that get really excited about change management. They start being told on the side, why don't you just try out that project, see how it works? But then there becomes an impatience in the accounting firm that they're not seeing a result fast enough, where they get pulled away to do client work instead of staying focused. Or the person that started it up in the accounting firm leaves. And
Yes.
so then basically this is left on the back burner. It wasn't a major initiative for the firm. Not everybody was bought in. And then it has to restart again by the next group of people that say, yeah, we really need to do this, and get that full buy-in. But you definitely, it's interesting, the data comes back, but boots on the ground, you see this over and over again of just the commitment that a firm's willing to make to do the change management.
Yeah. And that was the thing, like we've heard these things anecdotally, but to
Mm-hmm.
actually see it clearly in the data set was not surprised. It was nice to see, to understand that. And to your point, change management's hard. It takes,
Change management's very hard.
I mean, it can take 6 months, it can last a year, it could last 2 years, depending on the situation of the firm. But if you don't make that concerted effort, you're going to find yourself on the back end of that curve. And again, the other interesting thing to note about that curve was, once you got over the hump, we saw the curve flatten, which means that once you've made that decision, once you've made the effort, it's easier and easier for you to progress, to become more proficient, and to become more capable. And so one is to make the decision, and then two is to stick with it.